Good evening, everybody. I'm Betsy Fisher-Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and welcome to our weekly virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. Whether you're watching us on Crowdcast, Facebook Live, or C-SPAN, we're really glad that you could join us for this discussion. To those of you new to one of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU's School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic and practical campaign training, and we facilitate research and discussions like this on women in politics. So with less than 2 weeks to go until the election, we wanted to get an update on the work that several Republican groups are doing to elect more GOP women to Congress. A few weeks ago, we got an update on the Democratic side from the leaders at Emily's List. So tonight we're looking forward to hearing from the women on the other side of the aisle, as we say in Washington. So we're excited to have with us two friends of WPI, AU alum Julie Conway, who is the executive director of ViewPAC, and Rebecca Schuler, the former executive director and now an advisor and board member of Winning for Women. So thanks to you both for being here. Before we start, I want to let everybody know that we're going to save some time for questions. So at the bottom of your screen, you will notice a button to ask a question. So please feel free to do so during the course of our discussion, and you'll also be able to upvote other people's questions that you're interested in. And if you miss any of the discussion or you want to share it with your friends, replay will be available at the same Crowdcast link you used to register. So Julie and Rebecca, welcome. So with less than 2 weeks to go, let's rewind the clock a bit to 2018, the 2018 midterms, which was not a great year for Republican women. In fact, the 36 new women elected to the House, only one was a Republican. And the total number of Republican women in the House fell to 13, which was the lowest point in the last 2 decades. So that's compared to the 88 Democratic women currently in the House. So needless to say, you guys have had your work cut out for you in the last 2 years. So I just wanted to start to see if each of you could give us a sense of your organization and what your overall strategy has been these last 2 years to kind of close that gap as much as possible, and what your forecast is in the next few weeks. So Jules, let's start with you.
Yeah, so as Betsy said, I run ViewPAC, which stands for Value in Electing Women. The only good news about 2018 is that the bar is set pretty low for 2020. So we're expecting great things in 13 days. We've been working really hard, and we've got great candidates. As I'm sure most of you have read, it has been a record year in terms of Republican women signing up to run for federal office. 228 is the magic number, which is about twice what it was before, and our all-time high. Out of those 228, we have 94 women running for the U.S. House, which is extraordinary. So we're excited about that. The reality continues, though, that as Betsy said, there are a lot of Democratic women in the House, and so it's going to take us probably a few cycles to get to some sort of parity. But we know we're going to make some inroads this cycle. We have some great women running. Probably we have 5 to 7 that are really heavily favored to win already, which puts us in a pretty good spot to start. And that doesn't even get into more of the competitive races. I don't know how deep you want to go on that. Maybe I'll kick it over to Rebecca to give her brief, and then we can get into more specific races.
Because let's let Rebecca talk a little bit, and then I'm really curious about some of those Republican women to watch as the election clock clicks down, and as we're watching all the news and election returns coming in. So Rebecca, give us a little bit on Winning for Women.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Betsy, for having us today. I think it's events like this that do show both sides of the aisle, and the momentum that's behind Republican women. That's incredibly helpful for us all to get this message out as well. As you mentioned, I'm deeply involved with an organization called Winning for Women. Under that auspice, we have a few organizations. We have a C4 Winning for Women, a connected PAC, and then also a super PAC, Winning for Women Action Fund. So Winning for Women was founded end of 2017 to come in and work with organizations like ViewPAC and others. You've probably also all heard of Elise Stefanik's EPAC and Right Now and some others, really to try to come in and correct that heavily, sort of imbalance ratio of GOP women in the House and Senate. I think that we personally saw 2018 as a true rallying cry when we saw those numbers dip down to 13 and then dip even further with 2 retirements to 11. That really showed, I think, all of us the true need for smart, efficient, well-run organizations that could come in and do just this: identify, recruit, get these women in, and then figure out how to help them through that election cycle. And I know we'll get into all of this. But I think that where you've seen a real deficiency on the GOP side is just this surround sound support that, frankly, the left has been pretty good at doing for the last several decades through organizations like Emily's List and others.
Yeah.
And, we're here to make sure that our women are getting the same support.
How have you gone about what you were saying is like finding and recruiting some of the women to run this year?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that I think has just been something that's plagued our side for quite a while. And, I think Julie's a real standout in developing those relationships and identifying, candidates early. I think one of the true factors that creates challenges for us is that when you don't have a bench, and you're not looking a few election cycles out,
right,
you aren't going to have the women when the opportunity comes out. So, for us at Winning for Women, and I know Julie's been doing the same, the day before Election Day 2018, we were trying to look at a map, figure out, where were our opportunities, where were some great candidates that we would hear word of mouth through state legislatures, through organizations looking at both state and federal levels, et cetera, and we would go talk to them. And I think, again, as Julie mentioned, you've seen some real dividends this year. We're at record numbers of women who have filed to run as Republicans. That is translated into record numbers of women now running in the general. There are some success stories in an otherwise kind of quirky year. I do think we are seeing a positive with Republican women candidates, particularly in the House.
And Julie, why do you think that there has been this uptick? Do you think that 2018 was that wake-up call, or what are the other reasons for the definite increase in Republican women running this cycle?
Yeah, I think that it was a definite wake-up call. I think that a lot of Republican women saw the Democratic women get elected, and once they started to serve, they realized that the things those Democratic women were talking about, it wasn't the things that our Republican women were talking about. And so in order to counterbalance that, they said, look, I can't complain about this. I'm gonna raise my hand and run myself. And we hadn't seen anything like that before. In the spring of last year, probably through March, April, I talked to more Republican women considering running than I did during the entire 2018 cycle. It was incredible. And I think the other part is, there's been a foundation that has been built. It's taken us a long time to till the ground, as Rebecca said. UPAC's been around since 1997. We've always got involved in primaries. That has always been where we started. There's no way to get a woman, into a general election unless she wins the primary. The math is pretty simple.
Right.
But unfortunately, UPAC couldn't win a race with only us. And so it's not until you have more organizations like Rebecca's, like Winning for Women, and EPAC and all the Republican women in the House and Senate that are actually giving back to help candidates, it makes a big difference. And we've definitely seen that success this year.
There's always a lot written about, well, Republicans historically shy away from, gender politics, identity politics. Has that really been a factor? And I guess if so, why is that maybe now changing?
I'll take it. It has been a problem. The party has stayed out of primaries. And sadly, the concept of that is fine. Let the best man win. Unfortunately, often the best man is a woman, and she's at a disadvantage. And so, there needs to be some leveling of the playing field, and a lot of that has to do with fundraising. A lot of that has to do with the institutional support that female candidates get. And I think we've started to build that. And I think that, if you really have the eye on the prize on who's going to be the best candidate in November, you have to start paying attention to the candidates running in the primary. And,
right.
Sometimes the best candidate is a guy, but oftentimes the best candidate is a woman. And so we need to make a concentrated effort to go in there and give her all the support necessary so that not only does she win the primary, but everybody's already behind her heading into the general so it can be truly competitive.
Rebecca, does Winning for Women get involved in the primaries that early as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in fact one of the major tenets of our strategy is to do just that. I'll bring up a race that everyone kind of at times wants to hide a little bit under, but Winning for Women, we launched our action fund last year to deal with a special election down in North Carolina. There was what we felt to be, and I know Julie did as well, an exemplary candidate named Joan Perry. It turned out that she did not ultimately triumph in the special. But that said, here was someone who, Julie's exact fact pattern, like we saw this wonderful candidate who, without some outside support, just wasn't going to get any recognition and have zero tools to be able to come through and make a real run. So, I know we got involved, Julie got involved, the women members got involved. And while we didn't triumph, I think it was really a clarion call to what we could do, especially if we learned how to work together, came in and gave her the publicity and the outside group support and all of that she needed. And I think that example really set up, some of our action then coming in 2019 and 2020.
What lessons did you guys take away from that race too? Because if I recall, during that primary, she was actually, the mode of attack against her, right, was that she might compromise too much, that she wasn't as conservative enough.
Yeah.
And do you see that sort of amongst women candidates in general, them getting tagged as being maybe too much in the middle, especially when they're running in districts that may be much more conservative?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. And that, you're right. You are spot on. That was a perfect example of, I would argue, and I think Rebecca would, that quite frankly, Dr. Perry was probably more conservative than the gentleman that ended up winning. And it's just merely because she's a woman. And people assume that if you have, two resumes next to each other, one of a man and one of a woman with the exact same qualifications, if you're going to have one that's more conservative, it's going to be the man. And in this case, that certainly wasn't the case, but sort of the old patterns emerged there. And I think a couple of things happened, to your point, out of that. Even though we lost it, we learned a lot. So Winning for Women and ViewPAC and EPAC, we all work hand in glove now, which really wasn't the way of the past. There weren't the outside groups trying to support Republican women that actually work together to share our information. We talk all the time. And, the idea that when we work together, we can accomplish great things. And so ViewPAC has historically been the hard dollar, early support of candidates. Winning for Women, though, doing the hard dollar, their wheelhouse is really the independent expenditures coming in from the outside, providing, a lot of air cover for these candidates. And Elise has used her, Congresswoman Stefanik has used her leadership PAC to really put the marker in the sand and say, these are our candidates that I care the most about, trying to get her colleagues to follow that lead. And so between the three organizations, we've really made great headway this cycle. And I think that, the other thing that I'll point out is Elise Stefanik was the first woman to ever chair the recruitment committee at the NRCC in 2018. And so that was a huge difference because, we might have looked for women before, but if we had a self-funding guy, then that seat was off the table. We immediately go someplace else, even if there was a woman there that would be a tremendous candidate. And so follow that up in 2020 with Congresswoman Susan Brooks chairing recruitment. It makes a big difference to make sure that if conceivably there is a qualified, credible, viable woman willing to do this in a district where the woman is going to be the strongest candidate, that we really looked for her or listened when people called, even if we already had someone in that seat. And that's made a big difference.
And to those of you guys who are interested, we actually talked to Congresswoman Brooks a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 months ago about the NRCC and the recruitment effort specifically on women. So if anybody's interested in that. But I wanted to ask you too, Rebecca, along those same lines, Julie mentioned Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. As we recall, when she first announced EPAC, she had some pushback, right, from some Republican men in leadership, which she quickly shut down. But do you think that there's maybe been an attitude change? Have you seen signs of an attitude change from sort of the Republican leadership component?
I do. Yeah. First and foremost, if you look at, there's some stats out in the last few days that show that in the bulk of our, Republican opportunity pickup seats, you've got diverse candidates, predominantly women. how can you ignore that? It's, again, they're winning, they're doing well. I think the country wants to see a different electorate, and accordingly, I think that there's been a real change, and I have to give leadership and Leader McCarthy credit. It's been a priority. I think that Parker Polling's done a bang up job over at the NRCC. I think Congresswoman Brooks has done a bang up job over at the NRCC. I don't think you'd see the successes that we, again, are really seeing through 2020, kind of against the odds, without a sea change in attitude.
So speaking of success,
I would just quick underline that, and I agree 100% with Rebecca. And I'd also say that, sometimes when you see the playing field, you realize certain things have to happen. And certainly Leader McCarthy understands, and Chairman Emmer understands, that the only way we're getting back to the majority in the House is on the success of Republican women. And certainly on the Senate side, we know the balance of power in the Senate rests squarely on Republican women. And so, there's this added incentive that when it actually helps yourself and the team, you're more likely to engage. And so I think all these guys, they love the idea of having Republican women, but was it a priority? Not necessarily. They certainly supported the good women, but now it's more of a let's look here, because it actually brings us, a new voice at the table. It brings us constituencies we might not have been able to get. And I think they've really embraced that, which is terrific.
Yeah, I mean, you can't find what you're not looking for in many respects, right? So I wanted to talk to you guys about some of the success stories. Give us a sense of some of the candidates that are running, not the incumbents, but the new challengers that are running, and which ones should we be watching over the next 2 weeks and on election day, and what are some of those success stories and who those candidates are.
I'll start, Rebecca, if you don't mind, and then I'll take it over. Certainly the top five on the House side is actually pretty easy. For the first time in history, the top five most vulnerable incumbent Democrats in the House are being challenged by Republican women. And so this is really exciting. And so that's New York 11, which is Staten Island Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis running. New Mexico, Yvette Herrell running again. When we went to bed in 2018, Yvette Herrell was winning that race. We thought she was coming to Washington, and she ended up losing when the absentees came in. Claudia Tenney in New York 22, running to get her seat back. She's a congresswoman from that district, and Trump won the district, and so we have high expectations that Congresswoman Tenney will return. And then a couple of the really, really competitive ones, which is Oklahoma 5. Where we have Stephanie Bice running. This one is really interesting because it's the most Republican seat currently with a Democratic woman sitting in it. What was complicated here is that it was a super competitive primary that went to a runoff, and so Stephanie didn't win the nomination until August. And so sadly, we've been sort of firing the guns internally instead of at the enemy. And so now it's, all systems go to Stephanie win this race. And finally, the fifth one is South Carolina 5, where Nancy Mace is running. She's the first woman to graduate from the Citadel. She's a state rep. She's a tremendous candidate. I mean, these five women are terrific, and they have all of them have different backgrounds. Some have legislative experience, some don't. Some have military experience, some don't. We feel great about those five. And there's others, of course, but I'll kick to Rebecca to add the ones she wants to highlight.
Sure.
Yeah, I have to agree with that entire list that Julie just went through. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that there are also a few open seats where you're going to see some Republican women come through. Florida 3, there's a woman named Kat Kamek. She's young, she's energetic. She's a former staffer. I think that, she's likely a member of Congress. Illinois 15, a woman named Mary Miller. Michigan 10, a woman named Lisa McClain. Down in Tennessee, Diana Harshbarger. These are that number. We're starting at 11. That number is going to tick up. 11's sad, but we started off at Winning for Women with a goal of 20 and 20. When I came up with that, I'm like, oh, this is catchy. It's going to be hard, but it's catchy. I don't think it's as out of the realm as it seemed in 2018. And frankly, we came up with it before we knew of 2 retirements, and then it felt real out of reach. And now I don't think it's that out of reach. It would, it's still a high bar, but I think it's doable, and that's due to all of these wonderful women who've stepped in the ring, frankly.
Julie, you mentioned Yvette Harrell out in New Mexico running again. How important is it, as you talk to candidates, to actually run again? I feel like sometimes as women, we're maybe a little bit too easily discouraged sometimes. But that running again is such an important component. And if the women that are running this cycle, depending on where they're running, it's a presidential year, which is sometimes more difficult. But talk about that, the importance of actually running more than once.
Yeah, again, an upside from 2018 is that we had some tremendous women running who were not successful, and they wanted to come back and do it again. And so the only good news about that is you don't make the same mistakes twice. And so we have women running that some of them should have won last time, and some of them, this is a much better year for them to be running. So Young Kim in California, Tiffany Shedd in Arizona, Karen Handel, former congresswoman from the Atlanta suburbs, running to get her seat back. Yvette Harrell, of course. And so this is, you can't start with a team like that. We already know that they're going to have the right consultants, which again is it's a big deal. And, it's tough for women that have never done this before to know where to start. Often the guys have, a bench of other state reps or, whatever it happens to be, that their buddy's a consultant and they'll hook them up. This is a bigger challenge for women. And so, and there's only so many good consultants out there. And so, it's a double-edged sword. We've got all these great women, unfortunately we can't, Rebecca and I can't sit with all of them all day long across the country and do all the things we'd like to do. I mean, that's good news, bad news. The only thing, Betsy, you mentioned, sort of the competitive races, and the only thing I highlight, because so much has been, so much attention has been given to the historic number of Republican women we have running, which is great. But there's also some realities that go with it. So the Cook report came out, which is, pretty much the gold standard for, tracking the horses, if you will. And so out of their toss-up seats, the pure toss-ups in this country, as of today, there are 26. That's it. And so the next one on their scale is lean. And so if you add in their lean, the vulnerable Democrats in the lean column, that's another 17. So that gets us to 43. So out of 435 House seats, we've got 43 that are competitive. And so out of those 43, we have 14 Republican women, which is a tremendous number. But when you're starting at 228, all of a sudden your numbers drop pretty quickly. And so we have 94 nominees, 14 in super competitive seats. 2 of those 14 are incumbents. So Ann Wagner running in the same suburbs, that is a pure toss-up race. And as of today, Jamie Herrera-Butler, Congresswoman Herrera-Butler from Washington 3, that moved into a lean. And so these are 2 of our 11 incumbent women in the House in competitive races. And so, I don't like to, be Debbie Downer on this, but when we win, and we are going to win a lot of these seats, it's going to be a huge accomplishment. And so my fear has always been that the narrative is going to be, let's elect 20. Let's say Rebecca's right and it's 20, maybe it's 19, maybe it's 22. Whatever that number is, we don't want the narrative to be, even though they had 228 Republican women running, they only elected 20.
Right.
And so that can easily flip the script. And so I just caution that, we're definitely going to make make bigger numbers here. We're going to increase our numbers in the House. But we're going to have to keep building. I mean, we're not going to elect 88 Republican women this cycle. I wish we were.
Yeah. And the key is, and you've pointed this out before, I know, is that, the import is having these women running in seats that are winnable, right? And not just being on the ballot. If you've got a Republican candidate in a totally blue congressional district, that looks nice on the number of Republican women that are running. But if she doesn't have a shot, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, right?
Right.
And that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would guess, though, that the upside of that, though, and why it still makes sense is because it is, I think, does go a long way, especially as we think about young women being motivated to run, to actually see a woman on the ballot, right?
Yeah.
So I think you can take that both ways. What are your thoughts on that, Rebecca?
Well, again, like Julie, when we went to figure out back, at the beginning of 2019, what did 2020 look like? We wanted diversity within our endorsements. We wanted to make sure that we were putting an emphasis on quality candidate, and we wanted to figure out wins. You cannot build a movement within a party if you're fighting for your life every 2 years. And so, obviously the Venn diagram needs to come together. You need to come up with candidates who, are quality and are gonna, be good members of Congress, but you want, at least a large chunk of those people that you're coming in and supporting to be in places that they can come in and really grow into leaders within the party. And I think that that's going to be something that we see this year. That list that Julie and I went through of people who I think are going to come in are women who do have that ability. I would also be remiss if I did not note, Congresswoman Herrera Beutler and Congresswoman Wagner are both two great members of Congress. And, if anyone listening, lives near Washington or the St. Louis area and has some time on their hands or a few spare dollars, they both can and do merit, your support. They need the help too. And, it is as important for us to be supporting our incumbents as it is for us to be identifying and, pushing new candidates in.
Speaking of incumbents, I want to talk a little bit about some of the vulnerable Senate incumbents that you all have. Certainly Martha McSally comes to mind, Joni Ernst, Susan Collins, certainly. How do you see some of those, and they're all in kind of these big marquee Senate races. How do you see sort of the state of play in some of those races?
Yeah, so sometimes the Senate gets lost in the shuffle when we're talking about these things. But so coming into 2020, we have a historic record 9 Republican female senators serving, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. That's the good news. The bad news is 6 of them are up for re-election. It's sort of screwy the way things have worked out on the Senate side to have that many in cycle with the specials that are going on. And so you mentioned 2 of the top ones. Certainly the fate of the Senate rests in the hands of at least 3 Republican women. That's Susan Collins in Maine, Joni Ernst in Iowa, and Martha McSally in Arizona. And you couldn't have 3 stronger women that do more for their states than you could ever imagine. And so everyone is trying to help the 3 of them come back to Washington. The big story here has been the money. The money flowing into these races is just extraordinary. Martha McSally last quarter raised $22 million, which is awesome. It's twice the amount she'd ever raised in a quarter before. The problem is that Mark Kelly raised $40 million.
Right.
Same is going on in Iowa. Joni was outraised almost 2-1. Susan was outraised 3-1. The challenger in Maine, Sarah Gideon, raised almost $40 million, and Susan had raised a record amount. And it's just extraordinary. But it's funny on the Maine race. I saw today that Sarah Gideon, this is a fun little trivia fact. Sarah Gideon, that's running against Susan Collins in Maine, actually raised more money out of Portland, Oregon than she did out of Portland, Maine. So that is going this cycle. And so the platform on the Democratic side, Act Blue, they've got about a decade on us in terms of online fundraising in that way. And so it's really been a struggle for us to keep up with the money. And states like South Carolina, you see the Lindsey Graham race, which impacts our South Carolina 1 House race.
Right.
$58 million was raised against Lindsey last quarter. $58 million. How do you spend that kind of money? And so,
there's not enough TV channels in South Carolina media markets.
You should start buying cars to drive people to the polls and let them keep them. I don't know what you're gonna do, but at some point it stops being about who is the better person to serve in the United States Senate, and that's troubling. That's really sad. And I go into Arizona, Martha McSally has done more for the state of Arizona since being appointed in January 2019 than just about any senator in the country. She is tied with Chuck Grassley for the most legislation passed. I mean, that's incredible. And as much as the COVID has sort of changed everything in our country, COVID is perfect for Martha in terms of what she's great at, which is rolling up her sleeves and getting things done. And so she has been in every corner of that state, helping get PPP money in, doing everything possible, while Mark Kelly has sort of been sitting in his basement. I don't know if you actually have basements in Arizona, in his bunker, not going out, and the money's just been piling up. And so, sadly, it's the messaging that's out there. And if you buy enough messages and you tell the lies enough, people start believing it. And finally, just to put a finer point on it, the polls in both Arizona and Iowa have been pretty much been the same. It's 47-47, 47-47. And so both Joni and Martha are fighting over the 6%. And we'll see. I mean, we have 13 days until the election. Some of the internals on both sides have us up a couple. Some internals have us down a couple. But, those races that are going to absolutely get down to the wire.
I'll bring up the literal elephant in the room here is the Trump component, right? And what impact does that have on some of these races? Certainly, it's probably had an impact on the fundraising that you mentioned that the Democrats have been able to do, right?
Yeah. Hey, Rebecca, why don't you take that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I mean, look, you can't ignore that the president has an impact on candidates in 2020. Some a very good impact on candidates, and in other places, a tough impact. As Julie mentioned, I think in the places that we are unfortunately watching several very, very, very good U.S. women senators, the dynamics have been tough. That is an opportunity for an organization like Winning for Women to come in. For instance, in Iowa, we've been able to come in with the Action Fund has been able to come in with some outside money. It pales in comparison to the ability of the just vast online fundraising machine. On the other side. But again, I think this is the cry for why organizations like these are needed. You do, especially in a year that feels like a bit of a wave year, you need to have this infrastructure that's going to be able to come in and raise the army and help your candidates, particularly ones like a Senator Ernst, like a Senator Collins, like a Senator McSally. These are good women members, guys. And they're doing so much. As Julie pointed out, they're doing so much for their home states. And it's sad. We saw it in 2018 as well. And the fundraising machine often will just come in and decimate. And look, we as a party have a lot of work to do. I mean, our troubles with women predate 2016. It's not helping, but this is something that we as a party need to be focused on, and it's a long game, and I think we're playing it, and I think we're doing well.
What impact, if any, do you think that the Supreme Court pick, Amy Coney Barrett, has had on any of these races, or just in general, spotlighting, more conservative Republican women?
Frankly, I think it served as a motivator for the bases on both sides. With those, those few coveted swing votes in the middle, I don't think it's had much of an impact, frankly. Julie, I'll throw to you on this one too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that it has motivated, some conservative women who might not really love the president's rhetoric, but understands the importance of getting another conservative justice on the court. And I think that those women that might be hedging their bets a little bit, I mean, there's only one way they're going to vote now when they show up. And so, I mean, the same can be said on the left, and it's just sort of, which numbers are going to get out in greater force. Yeah. So I think it's about a draw on that.
Let me take a couple questions from the audience here. Here's a question from Caitlin. She says, how do you think President Trump's rhetoric about women has affected your voting block or recruiting block, particularly with diverse women? Let's take a stab at that.
I would say it has. Yeah. I mean, it hasn't. I mean, either if you love President Trump, you're motivated to come out and support his policies and wave the flag and do those things. And if you're not a huge fan of the president, that motivated you as well, to come out. You might like his policies, but you want to show that, not all Republicans necessarily look like Donald Trump. And so, it depends where you are in the country. As Rebecca said, it's really helpful candidates, and some other candidates, it's been more challenging. And so, one of the things you can say about Donald Trump, on the plus side, is he definitely demonstrated that you didn't have to have some sort of pedigree or resume to run for federal office. And I think that actually was a huge motivator for a lot of Republican women who, oftentimes on the Republican side, people sort of climb the ladder of running for state house or mayor and, waiting your turn and coming up. And a lot of women were disadvantaged of that because they didn't run for their kindergarten class president and serve, all the way through the way guys did. And so now all these Republican women realize, look, I don't have to wait around. I don't have to allow the guys to do this because they've been a state rep for 20 years. I have something to offer and I'm going to get out there and run. And I think so. I think that on that piece of it, the Trump factor has been great for women.
Rebecca, anything you want to add on that?
I'm going to totally dodge the question and go to Julie's point of women jumping in. Let me
tell you.
This isn't our first rodeo.
It is so incredibly important for women to feel the ability to run for Congress. Like the men, and this is cliched and something we've heard a million times over, but I think it's worth repeating. Every male candidate we talk to is like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. Look, I could run for president. It's been done. and the women tend to not have that same confidence. And I agree with Julie wholeheartedly that we are seeing just a broad range of women with all sorts of different atypical, frankly, resumes that are coming in this year, which I think is awesome. And I hope that continues. I think it will. You can't help but see the impact of women like you on the airwaves and women like you sitting in Congress. Like that's going to promote more women. And so, yay, go us.
Senator Collins used to tell a story that she had a male opponent, a couple of cycles ago. And she used to joke that he would claim he had foreign policy experience because he drove a Toyota. And so that's the difference between men and women. Women want to make sure they know all the issues in depth. And guys just, they tend to wing it more. And so that's, again, the good news, bad news about female candidates. We're going to be much more engaged on the issues.
Here's a question from Carol. She says, my dream is for two women to be the presidential candidates in 4 years, say Harris and Haley, Nikki Haley, I assume she's talking about. If that were to happen, which means that we'd have our first woman president, how would that help your cause in terms of more Republican women running to see a strong Republican woman as a nominee for president?
Immeasurably. Especially that lineup. Nikki Haley, I think, is a bang-up role model for pretty much everyone. So, again, I'm a broken record, but seeing yourself makes a difference, and seeing yourself at the highest echelon of government, that will have infinite power of having women, feel as though that is a viable path for them. So, here's to hoping.
Yeah. Have you seen some of the other Republican women office holders be effective in campaigning for other women up and down the ticket? Like a Nikki Haley?
Yeah. The funny thing, of course, is that everything is different this cycle because of COVID, right? You can't get out there as much as you used to. But one of the great things that's happened is that all of a sudden Nikki Haley can appear on a town hall with Martha McSally. And you can be anywhere in the country and help each other. And the women have really done that. They've really come together to try to help each other fundraise and give credibility to certain candidates that they might not have had otherwise. And so it's one of those, weird things that have come out of this that have really helped our women.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Congresswoman Brooks sitting in the recruitment chair position at the NRCC. Take a place like in Oklahoma 5, New Mexico 3. There were several places where your two top contenders in the primary were women. We knew early on that both of those races were going to have, we were pretty sure that there was going to be a woman sitting there. And frankly, given their general election matchup, I think they were the better candidate to be able to take on those seats too. So, I think the focus on women members, really guiding the process has had great effect. And you see it, kind of even in these early stages where you see some of these primary matchups where it as much as it was difficult to watch, both Stephanie Bice get beat up on and beat up on her very capable opponent. But yet we knew that, someone was going to come through, and that's great. That's a good problem to have.
Let's see, here's a question from Sydney, who says, as the election approaches, we've heard a lot of talk about Trump losing the support of white suburban women voters. How can the Republican Party better act to gain the support of this important voting bloc?
I put more women in and talk to women voters. I think that one's by no means simple, but yet simple.
You agree, Julie?
We can stop calling them housewives. I mean, that'll help.
Yeah.
That would help.
Somebody was quoted today, I think a professor at USC, that made an interesting point on that topic. She basically said that call out to suburban housewives was less about appealing to suburban housewives than it was about appealing to male voters in sort of the, big macho man way of thinking about things. I thought that was an interesting point, that maybe that was an appeal more to men than actually to women.
Absolutely, without question. There have been lots of dog whistles, this cycle, and with a keen ear, you can pick up on these things. Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. And the thing about the suburbs is that if you still think about the suburbs as sort of Leave It to Beaver, you're playing it wrong. That's not what the suburbs look like anymore. And so, I think to try to lump them all together is a mistake as well. We've got some great women who represent the suburbs. This goes back to how we started this conversation, though. There's only so many competitive seats. The swing seats tend to be some of these suburban seats. And so last cycle, the Democratic women were so successful. We're targeting them this cycle, not because they're women, but because those are the most vulnerable incumbents. And so for those that believe in actually achieving parity in Congress, which I do, I think that the Congress is, should be more reflective of our country, more diverse. Right. And so, I've talked about this before, but it doesn't bring any joy that our great Republican women are going to take out Democratic women. That doesn't help us achieve parity. And so I would much rather be going after the middle-aged white Democratic guy. I mean, that would be a lot more fun. And I think that, having more women in Congress, we're just going to get more done on both sides of the aisle. And I think if you ask any of the Democratic freshmen, they certainly wish they had more Republican women to work with.
Yeah. So how do you retain more women in the party? Because a lot of women have left the party and are now actually identifying more as either independent or as Democratic. So how, especially in this era of Trump, what is the message that to retain more women in the party?
Are you talking voters, Betsy, or members?
Yeah, I'm talking voters.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I'm going to go back to my broken record statement of you do need to see more women there. I do think that the country wants to see itself in Congress. And as Julie aptly pointed out, when you see a party of old white men, that doesn't happen. I do think also, though, my gig before I came over to Winning for Women was to figure out messaging to women voters. And there's a there. You got to be talking to women about the issues that are important to them. Julie used the word or the term dog whistles a few minutes ago. Those aren't going to talk to women voters. You do need to think about the issues that are important to them. COVID's clearly one of them right now. The economy is one of them right now. But, sometimes when you look at economy too, that's not necessarily being filtered through women's voting preferences in the same way it is for men. If you look in some of the recent polling, male voters tend to be more supportive of Trump on the economy. I don't know whether this is, 100% true or not, but I think that the typical, male voters perhaps looking at just at the performance of the stock market, whereas your woman voters, tending to be probably multitasking both with her job and her family and all the above, and looking more at what the bottom line of the household looks like. So, I just think that women voters tend to think about these things in a little bit more complicated and nuanced way at times. And we need to, when we're messaging to them, we need to think through that and talk to them. Like, that's just, the Democrats figured it out. We got to do it too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a similar question here from Julie, who says, how can Republicans better communicate its policies around healthcare, education, and the economy? Which are some of the issues that their women care about, right?
Yeah, I mean, all issues are women's issues. We talk about this all the time. And we have, no offense to Rebecca's old line of work, we're not great messengers. And so everything's so complicated. I'm not saying you were great, Rebecca. I mean, everything you did was, there's just, we make things too complicated. Women want to know, just like guys want to know, when are the kids going back to school? When can I go to my restaurant down the street and sit at the bar? Like, these are the things I want to know. I don't need to know, exactly how many dollars and cents are going into some PPE, trillions of dollars here and this bill there. I mean, nobody understands that, nor do they want to. All they know is that there's fighting in Washington. Things aren't getting done. Their kids are, working from the living room, and, nothing is the same. And how are we going to get back there? And so, Democrats historically have been very good at that simple messaging, whereas Republicans haven't. I think we've been right on the policies. We've just had a really difficult time explaining them.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And frankly, at times when you're coming in trying to explain a tax benefit and you're getting into the nitty gritty and numbers and why this loophole works, et cetera, like that's not going to resonate. We need to figure out simple messages that explain it. And in a soundbite, not because our voters
and not overplay the soundbite. So Democrats also tend to overplay the soundbite. The whole defund the police. This whole thing that's very catchy and that worked for a while. But at the end of the day, we kind of get it. Like, not everyone wants to defund the police, but there needs to be some reforms. But people get to the point where they don't believe anyone. They just think that it's all propaganda, and we don't know what's right and what's wrong. I know my friends, the police officers. I know my friends, the other first responders. And so you need to be realistic about this stuff, and also understand that messaging to someone that lives in the suburbs of St. Louis is a very different message than somebody living in Des Moines. They're not facing the same issues. And so we just got to get better at the messaging.
Yeah. Here's a question about sort of the challenges of women running for office from Victoria. And she says, as a woman who's been empowered by my surroundings growing up, I'm curious about the obstacles that women would genuinely face as opposed to men in running for congressional seats or other seats. What is one recurring problem that you observe?
Money.
Money for sure. And that's a huge one. We talked about the assumption that a woman is less conservative. The other thing, there have been studies done on this, that if you are a credible guy and people don't like you, they'll still vote for you. But if you're a credible woman with great issues, if they don't like you, they won't vote for you. And so there's a very thin line that you have to walk between this likability and still being, coming off and being as smart as you are and not dumbing it down, because there's a lot of jealousy factors around that women deal with that men don't. I would guess that very few guy candidates have ever been asked, well, if you win, who's going to take care of the kids? There's a lot of that. And it's some of that has gone away, but not all of it. And that the thin line that women walk between being confident and being the B word, and people don't want the B word. And so it's a different game that they have to play than guys do.
And do some of those issues impact Republican women more? I would assume maybe the children, who's watching your children kind of question, right?
I think so. I mean, we even saw it. Let's go back to the North Carolina 3 race. You had this woman who was just like, assumptions were thrown at her right and left, including there was a New York Times article right before the special, and here was the person interviewed was in until the very last statement that the reporter had with them, and she was like, I don't know though. She's a woman. Like, like maybe not. I just think that sexism is still there. We need to figure out how to overcome it, obviously, as a people. I mean, as a party too, but as a people. And I'm going to put a blatant plug in for organizations like all of ours here. The fact that we are looking at women, figuring out ways to create opportunity for them, figuring out how to help them get around these obstacles. That's how we are going to start to change that story. And, baby steps. This is a long game, sadly, but it is.
I'm curious, if you guys can take off the Republican hat for a second and just evaluate how Kamala Harris has been able to navigate some of those gender issues, being the vice presidential nominee.
It's been tough for her. I will not cite the profile of the person I'm talking about, but it might be a family member of mine. After the first debate, this person was like, well, I thought she came off really aggressive. And I was like, you did? I'm like, I think she came off like a pretty competent prosecutor, which is what she was. So, I think that first of all, I think she's a candidate has matured pretty significantly from the primary process to now. But I think she's still got, a bit of an uphill battle, particularly with older voters. I think that younger voters probably see her differently. I also saw some interesting polling this week that showed kind of, breakdowns of men versus women in different demographic groups of how important they thought that, the vice presidential pick on the other side was a diverse woman. Women voters were much more likely to see that as being an important thing than their male peers. So, again, that those obstacles are just very much still there for her. But I think she's doing pretty well.
What do you think, Julie?
I agree with Rebecca. I'm just gonna leave it there. The only thing I would add is, we try to make this too complicated. If you're a Republican, you hate Kamala Harris. If you're a Democrat, you love her. I mean, it's just
everybody has their jersey on, right?
Yeah. Yes. And it's hard. And anything she says, it's going to be accentuated one way or the other, depending on how you feel going into it. And look, it's hard to run for office. It's hard to run for any office, let alone the highest stage in the land. And so, McSally would say, every day I wake up and 50% of the people love me and 50% of the people hate me. And it's the people that hate me that I'm going to hear from. And so it's hard. I mean, this is a hard life. And, we joke about the candidates often, and we, wonder how they can do or say what they do. It's a really tough job. And it's the first conversation I have with any candidate that comes in front of me, which is, wow, you seem really normal. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to put your family through it? And so, I'm always,
do you do the tough talk? Do you do sort of the tough talk to candidates, or are you trying to actually persuade them, or are you trying to realistically give them a sense of what's ahead?
I do both. I mean, my only goal is to make candidates as good of candidates as they can possibly be. I mean, I had a tough conversation with a couple of candidates this cycle who, after they got in the race, I told them, you're not going to win. This is not good. It's a waste of your resources. It's a waste of your family's time. And they pulled out. And, they might run for something else down the line. But, I'm not into the kamikaze thing. And I'm not in this participation trophy. I want the best candidate out there that has the best chance of winning. In some of these seats, Rebecca and I have talked about it. The guy is actually a much better candidate. And so I don't get involved in that race. I might, talk our female candidate a check, but I'm not going to engage, too much in that race. I mean, we want our best women coming forward so that, going back to your point, there are idols out there, there are role models, there are people to look up to. I mean, that's where I spend all of my time is helping these great women win, and not, for me, it's about quality and not quantity. Like, someday I hope that we can start, picking off our incumbent guys. Once we have 150 Republican women in the House, we can get rid of some of the bad incumbent Republican guys. But we've got a long ways to go between now and then.
Well, I want to let everybody know before we go here of a couple other Women on Wednesdays that we have coming up, and we hope you'll join us for this. Next week, we are going to talk to the filmmaker and a few activists that are in her film. It's called Resisterhood. It's about takes place mainly about the Women's March after the 2016 elections, and looks at a couple women who are involved in activism. And the film is just now out. And if you register, you can also get a link to watch the documentary ahead of time. And these are some of the women that are spotlighted in the film. So we hope you will join us for that next week. And then we are going to do a post-election look on November 11th. I didn't want to schedule it for the Wednesday after the election because who knows if we're going to know anything by then. So we have scheduled it for November 11th with Emily Ramshaw, who is the CEO and co-founder of the 19th, which is a terrific new news organization dedicated to reporting news about women, and Rebecca Becker, who is their Washington correspondent. So that'll be on November 11th. So we hope that everyone can join us for that as well. So with that, Julie and Rebecca, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. And we will be watching on election night to see what the voters say.
Thanks, Betsy. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. Take care.
Thank
Hope
you.
to see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.